What's up guys, you're watching Life TCG. I've got a Pauper video for you today. If you're a regular follower of my content, then you might remember that like a blue-black teachings kind of list is one of the decks that I like to play in Pauper. And the most recent update to that deck was quite a long time ago, just with the unification of the format, combining online and paper, allowed the deck to play Desert, which I thought was quite a strong card for a control strategy. Easily allows the deck to deal with small creatures of the format like Spellstutter Sprite, Ninja of the Deep Hours, Nettle Sentinel, things of that nature. So in the meantime, the deck has got some pretty significant upgrades from a few intermediate sets since this card was added to the format, and particularly the most recent set, Kaldheim. So the one innovation that I added to this blue-black teachings archetype in Pauper was with the release of Ikoria, which was the inclusion of a card called Lurking Deadeye. So what this is, it's a 4-mana creature, 4/2. It has flash, which is obviously critical because not only is that a great ability by itself, it also means you're allowed to search for it with mystical teachings. So it has the ability, when it enters the battlefield, you can destroy a target creature that was dealt damage this turn. And of course that has really good synergy with Desert. You Desert to ping one of their creatures, then Lurking Deadeye can come in and no matter how much toughness, just instantly kill it. And of course, this effect, creature enter the battlefield to destroy another creature that's been dealt damage that turn. There are a lot of commons that have that effect in Pauper, but this is the first one that's been printed with flash. And obviously that's crucial for the combo with Desert, because you can't deal damage to a creature with Desert in your own turn. So that was an upgrade to the deck that I thought was pretty interesting, but I didn't have any time to make a video on that. And in the most recent set, Kaldheim, there's been an additional upgrade to Lurking Deadeye, which is a new card with a Foretell mechanic. Which is called Jarl of the Forsaken. So it's a very similar card. It has the same enter the battlefield trigger. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature that was dealt damage this turn. Creature or planeswalker and opponent controls. Okay. Basically the same. And then it also has flash, also costs 4 mana. It has 1 less power than the Lurking Deadeye. It's only a 3/2. And that's actually a little bit relevant in Pauper because there are quite a few walls that have 4 toughness, like Overgrown Battlement, Mnemonic Wall, and even like Stonehorn Dignitary, for example. This can't attack through those, whereas the Deadeye can. But a big upgrade for the Jarl of the Forsaken compared to the Lurking Deadeye is that it has the Foretell mechanic. So Foretell 1 black means that, like any Foretell card, you can exile it from your hand at sorcery speed for 2 mana, and then it's like foretold, and then at any time you can play it for its Foretell cost, and for this card that's only 2 mana. So that additional flexibility is really strong. For example, you can foretell this on turn 2, then on turn 3 you have a Desert, so you have Desert and 2 other lands because it's your turn 3, then they attack, you Desert to ping their guy, then you have 2 more lands that pays for the Foretell cost on this. So straight away on turn 3 you've already deployed your combo, whereas to do the combo with Lurking Deadeye and Desert, you need Desert and 4 other lands because you have to pay that cost up front all at once. So even though the Jarl has the lower power, I think it's a big upgrade for the deck. Compared to the Lurking Deadeye. So once you have these like flash threats in your deck that are like threats but also like utility / removal spells, you don't have to be so reliant on the like late game late game win conditions. So what the deck often played in the past was like Pristine Talisman plus Evenkar's Justice. And of course, that's like a very expensive, like super slow win condition. You know, you need like 7 mana buyback over the course of several turns, often with like counterspell backup, that kind of thing. So now you just have like these flash 3-power attackers. So you just like kill their creatures, start attacking. More straightforward in that sense. You don't have to like invest so much resources into like very, very expensive spells that are like a little bit clunky. So in a way, it becomes more like less of a like super late game hard control deck, and more like the kind of Jeskai Flash kind of list that Jerry Thompson made really popular around the like Return to Ravnica standard, when you had like Snapcaster Mage, Resto Angel, and like Augur of Bolas as your creatures, and then you just had like a few counterspells and like lightning bolts, and I don't remember if lightning bolt was actually legal in that format, but like Searing Spear or whatever, you get the idea. Yeah, so it becomes more like mid-rangey rather than like a hard control deck. So I'll get into the rest of the list. It's sort of speculative at the moment because all these cards are new and I haven't had too much chance to like test it fully, but I'll give you a good idea of like the kind of skeleton of it, and then you can sort of figure out what kind of tweaks you might want to make. So for the creatures, I'm only playing the 4 Jarls of the Forsaken, so 4 of the zombie, and then 4 Augur of Bolas. So the nice thing about Augur is that as a blocker, it gives you another way to deal damage to opponent's creatures, so you can trigger this more reliably. Like if they if your opponent has a 2/2 and then you have this, then they have to worry about attacking into it, because then if you block, then boom, you can kill the guy. Or even if they have like a Gurmag Angler or something, still blocking it with this lets you kill it with this, so that's a pretty nice interaction. And of course, Augur of Bolas is just a good card. It lets you block early creatures while selecting for the spells that you need. Yeah, just a strong card. So, and nice combo with the Jarl. And in the previous video, I also mentioned that like it has a reasonable combo with Desert as well for the same reason. Like if you have Desert plus Augur of Bolas, then they can't attack into you with 2 toughness creatures anymore, because you can just block and then shoot with Desert to finish off their creatures. So yeah, so these are the only creatures I'm playing. There aren't really other creatures I'd be interested in playing. Kuon Barge Witches is kind of interesting, as the ping ability has a lot of synergy both with Desert and with the Jarl, but the mana cost is pretty difficult, the double black, and the you don't want to play too many creatures because it makes your augurs worse. So that's one potential option, but I think it might be more of a sideboard card. Then for the spells, 4 Counterspell, pretty standard for like a blue-black kind of control deck. You can argue that maybe the blue-blue is a little bit difficult to get, especially when you're playing a bunch of deserts and stuff in the mana, but I still think it's pretty good. If you think the mana's not good enough, you can play like some copies of Prohibit or whatever instead of that. Then 4 Cast Down. So this is a little bit of an interesting choice. In the previous video of the blue-black teachings deck that I made, this card hadn't been downshifted yet. I had to play Rendflesh instead. Obviously this is an upgrade in every sense. Well, I guess, is there any legendary creature that's being played in Pauper? I don't think so. So yeah, so this is basically just an upgrade. It kills spirits and it only costs 2 mana. Obviously it's not essential to play 4 copies of this, but it's just like the best removal spell, and I thought it would be like a reasonable place to start. Depending on what meta game you expect or other kind of creature threats you might face, you can maybe decide to choose some different options, but I think 4 Cast Down is a reasonable place to start. Then only 2 copies of Mystical Teachings. So in the past, whenever I played Teachings in the like very hard control decks, I always played 4. So it's still good, still like a reasonable card. As tutors for all your spells, it can tutor for the Jarl of the Forsaken, things like that. So it has a lot of utility. The problem with a card like Mystical Teachings in a deck like this is that in a lot of situations you don't really have like specific tutor targets that you really have to find. Oftentimes you're just using this as like a very generic card advantage effect, like you Teachings for like Counterspell or something just to find some interaction, or like a cast down to take care of their threat, and then you like flashback Teachings, get another Teachings, and then you use that to Teachings for like Exclude or something. So it's not exactly a situation where you're like you're trying to assemble your own combo, so you like use Teachings as like a proactive way to search for your Songs of the Damned, I guess would be like the Pauper example. But like or in Modern you could play like a few Teachings to search for like Angel's Grace or Ad Nauseam, right? Like you can't do anything like that in this Pauper deck, so Teachings is a bit worse there. And also, especially in game 1s, there's not really an expected situation where you need to like find your one copy of something that like totally breaks the game open. You just get like maybe like a situationally more useful removal spell. Like if you really need to get like an Agony Warp or something to try and get like a 2-for-1. I mean, it's kind of nice, but it's not the biggest deal. So if you're gonna use this, if you're gonna play a card, it's just a like generic card advantage spell, then you don't really want to pay 10 mana for it. It's just too much, and you end up falling behind too easily. So rather than play Mystical Teachings so many copies, I have instead 4 copies of the new Counterspell from Kaldheim, 4 copies of Behold the Multiverse. So this is another card with a Foretell mechanic. 4 mana instant, scry 2, then draw 2 cards. It has Foretell for 1 and a blue. So the first thing is that playing multiple Foretell cards is kind of nice because it means that you can bluff either one. Like if you make that play that I explained before on your like turn 3, if you Foretell a card on turn 2, and then your turn 3 is you have 2 lands and then you have a desert, then like if your opponent attacks into you and you have the Jarl foretold, then you're gonna ping the attacker and Jarl to kill their guy. But if they don't attack because they're trying to play around you using that combo, then at the end of the turn you just cast this and draw 2. So it's sort of like the like fairies thing that people always talk about, where like you kind of put them in a bad situation either way and they have to like struggle to figure out what you're doing. So that's kind of nice. But I think this is also just like a solid card by itself. Just to take over that kind of like card advantage role that Mystical Teachings kind of did in the previous version of the deck. It's like fungible is the word of the month, right? With all of the crypto nonsense that's going on. So that's the way that you would describe it. Like a lot of the spells in the deck are all like kind of fungible. Like do you want to take care of the guy? Do you want to counter it, or do you want to use a kill spell on it, or do you want to use like whatever other kill spell on it? Like, or do you want to use that kill spell on it? You know, like a lot of the time it doesn't really matter which exact one that you have in your hand. You just need a copy of something. So scry 2, draw 2 is much better than like just tutor for 1 copy of something. The other thing is that scry 2, draw 2 can find lands, whereas Teachings doesn't. And stacking up multiple deserts is a pretty big part of how your game plan proceeds. So that's an important factor to consider as well. So yeah, so I do think that just playing Behold the Multiverse as like a generic card advantage effect is a lot stronger than playing a bunch of Mystical Teachings. So yeah, so that's so far with spells. We've got the 4 Behold the Multiverse, 4 Counterspell, 4 Cast Down, and the 2 Mystical Teachings. Then I'm also playing 4 Think Twice. Now this is kind of like a holdover from the previous version of the list, just because I always play the like blue-black teachings kind of flash sort of strategy with Think Twice before. So it's possible that this could be accumulated knowledge instead, or the new one, Frantic Inventory. So the reason why that might be a bit better is because it has the same upside with the Behold the Multiverse as the deserts do. So because you're like churning more quickly through your deck, finding more copies of cards, it makes it a little bit easier to chain multiple copies of a card like accumulated knowledge. So that could be an upside to consider compared to Think Twice. And like you also have Augur of the Bolas. You also have Augur of Bolas in your 60 as well. So that's another card that can help you specifically combo multiple copies of accumulated knowledge together. So yeah, the accumulated knowledge or Frantic Inventory could be a better choice for this list than some previous versions of the deck that I've been playing. So that's just something to consider. But also the entire effect might not be even necessary, because if you already have the 4 Behold the Multiverse and the 2 teachings and like Augur of Bolas' card advantage as well, then maybe this is just too much, like excessive card advantage, just being 4 extra slots on it. But that's just what I have for the moment. You could easily reconsider that. So then I have a bunch of other 2-offs in the list. So I have 2 Disfigure. I think the deck needs like a few more ways to interact that are a bit cheaper. As you can see, like it's pretty light on 1 mana effects so far. And a lot of previous versions of this list I've also played like 1 Tragic Slip as well in addition to this. So that's also something you could consider. Has a really good synergy with Desert. So like if you get attacked with like a Core Skyfisher or something, you can Disfigure it, you take no damage, and then you ping it to kill it. So yeah, any of the like toughness based removal scale as well with Desert, so it becomes a little bit more appealing than it would be otherwise. And similarly, we have 2 Echoing Decay. So Echoing Decay is just like a pretty solid card, I think. The way the list is built currently, you have a lot of problems with tokens, especially Battle Screech, because your counter spells are not very effective against it either. You can like quote unquote beat it with Desert, but obviously not if it's like Rally the Peasant bird tokens that are like killing you in 1 hit. Desert's not going to be very good against that. So yeah, like all your spot removal like Cast Down is not good against Battle Screech. Counterspell is not good against Battle Screech, etc, etc. So you want to have some kind of like sweeper effect that can deal with token stuff like that. So Echoing Decay is one option. Obviously the other option is the cycling one from Ikoria. I think it's called Suffocating Fumes. Yeah, so you definitely want to have like some kind of effect like that in the deck. Which one is correct, I'm not sure. You could play like 1 of each or anything like that. You probably want to have at least some Suffocating Fumes in the sideboard. And yeah, we want to have that card in the 75 somewhere, but for now I just have 2 Echoing Decay in the main deck because they serve a similar function. And Echoing Decay just has a bit more utility because it kills 2 toughness creatures. But obviously the cycling on Suffocating Fumes is good as well. Then I have 2 Diabolic Edict. I'm not exactly sure if this card should be main deck at all. The problem with playing an Edict in a list like this is that it's very bad with Desert, because you imagine your opponent has a creature like a Thraben Inspector or something, and you have 2 deserts, then they're just not going to attack the Thraben Inspector into your deserts because you're just going to kill it for free. So they're just going to leave the Thraben Inspector there then when they do play a big creature, like a scary creature that you want to use your Edict on, they still have their Thraben Inspector sitting there because they haven't been attacking with it because they're afraid of the desert. So then your Edict will just eat their Thraben Inspector. I mean, and you could say that about Edicts in general, even if you don't have Desert in your deck, right? Like, Thraben Inspector is a card that people play regardless, but it's just makes Edicts like a little bit worse for this deck than other types of removal would be. So you do want to have some Edicts in the 75 because otherwise you have that sort of like blue-black control problem that you're very bad against decks like Heroic and Boggles without ways to make them sack creatures because like obviously your cast downs and your counterspells are not the most effective against strategies like that. So 2 Diabolic Edicts in the main deck is like one way to handle that. Another way is just to play like a bunch of Chainer's Edicts in the sideboard and not play any Edicts in the main deck. That's another approach that I think is justifiable as well. So yeah, I have the 2 Edicts here, but they're not essential and they might even be like wrong. And then the last few cards, I have 2 copies of Exclude, just a very efficient way to exchange resources. So usually it's card advantage, but at like a tempo exchange that is usually only like slightly down or even favorable for you. The only time Exclude is really bad is if you're playing against like very, very aggro strategies that don't give you time to get to 3 mana. But usually there's enough matchups in Pauper that are about this kind of like resource battle that I like having 4 copies of this card in the 75 normally. I'm just playing 2 copies main deck because I'm afraid that playing more makes the deck a little bit too slow. And then the last 2 cards, 1 copy just randomly of Agony Warp. So as I keep saying, that like removal that modifies power and toughness is really nice with Desert because like Desert upgrades this to allow it to kill 4 toughness creatures, or for example if your opponent's attacking you with 2 creatures, then you use the toughness to kill one of them and then you shrink the power off the other one so it deals no damage to you and then you kill it with Desert. Yeah, Agony Warp is just like a clutch card to have when you have all this other Desert and Jarl and everything going on. Oh yeah, because obviously Agony Warp is great if you can block stuff as well, which is something that doesn't come up in like a creatureless version of the teaching sticks. And then the last card is pretty unique, but quite good, I think. 1 copy of Grim Harvest. So because the deck has so many creatures in it now, this can be like a pretty strong late game engine. You just keep returning 1 Jarl. If they kill your Jarl, you get Grim Harvest back. Then you Grim Harvest the Jarl back, and you just keep looping it. The nice thing about the way that works is that if your opponent kills your Jarl in combat, like imagine your opponent has like a Gurmag Angler. So you, in like a very, very late game situation, obviously, because this takes a lot of mana, you like block their Gurmag Angler. So your Jarl dies, then you recover this, then you cast this, get your Jarl back, and because you blocked in this turn, you just play the Jarl immediately and blow up the Angler. So you can slowly just like grind out all of the threats by doing that. And even just like in the mid game to get your augurs and stuff back, it's pretty strong as well. So yeah, just like gives the deck a little bit of extra like late game punch that I think is quite strong. So yeah, that's the entire main deck. I'd probably play 4 of this and 4 Augur. I just think they're like the best creatures available. Then for the spells, 4 Counterspell probably correct, but some of them could be Prohibit. 4 Behold the Multiverse I think is correct as well. Then, like I said, 4 Think Twice, possibly correct, but it could also be Accumulated Knowledge or Take Inventory, or this slot just shouldn't be like a card advantage spell at all, like it could just be more removal. 2 teachings I think is fine, just as a bit of extra late game punch. And it also helps your post-board games a lot, because when you board in cards like Unexpected Fangs or Annul or whatever weird instant you think is useful, it gives you extra virtual copies of it, so that's nice. If you have 2 teachings, you can use the first teachings to find the second one, so it has a lot more utility compared to just playing 1 copy, things like that. But yeah, it's a little bit slow, and just like the Think Twice, maybe unnecessary, but that's something you just have to sort of figure out. Cast Down, the most efficient removal spell, but if you wanted a bit more flexibility, you could switch these out for other cards that I've played in the past, like Splendid Agony or Tragic Slip or things like that. I probably wouldn't get too fancy with it, especially with the like more mana-wise, more expensive options. But more Disfigure or more Tragic Slip could be a good switch for these. 2 Exclude I think is probably good in the main deck, but you can increase or decrease as per how fast you think the format is. The slower the format, Exclude becomes much stronger. Then Echoing Decay, not necessarily essential for the main deck, but probably good, and you at least need some kind of like token sweeper effect in the 75 somewhere. 2 Disfigure, I assume that's like a minimum. Just a solid card for when you're trying to interact early. 2 Edicts, like I say, possibly unnecessary or even not good at all, but you want to have some Edicts, probably quite a few in the 75, just to help battle the Hexproof decks and the Heroic decks. Then the Grim Harvest, I'd probably keep that, seems good. And then the Agony Warp is just like another like replaceable removal spell. So yeah, that's the outline of that strategy. So I do like the fact that it lets the deck be more proactive. You don't have to spend so many slots on things like Pristine Talisman and even Cards Justice and those like super late game cards that aren't so great early, and they can like make you fall behind too much when you're playing the full-on creatureless teachings version. Having creatures in your deck, of course, means your opponent can interact with you with their own removal spells, but all of these replace themselves when they enter the battlefield anyway, or they should in the case of the Jarl. And I guess this can whiff, but that should be able to give you a +1 as well, so it's not that bad if your opponent interacts with you and you have the Grim Harvest to loop them back. So adding the creatures doesn't seem to be that much of a downside. I'll just quickly run through the mana base. So I have the 4 deserts, 1 Terramorphic, a bunch of islands, 7 islands, 2 swamps, 4 Dismal Backwater, 4 Aqueduct, 1 Bojuka Bog, 1 Radiant Fountain. So whether this is the right split of like island swamps, I mean, it's probably close, but I'm not exactly sure. You mainly want the blue mana so you can cast Counterspell more reliably on turn 2. Then Radiant Fountain, a lot of people have, well, I think Alex Ullman recently made like a tweet saying that this card is like very overrated in kind of this like mid-range strategies, but I think the mana requirements aren't too steep. Like you have the Foretell on turn 2, which gives you a lot of uses for the colorless mana. And I think the life gain for this list is really important because of the way that desert functions. You have to let the creatures hit you before you can desert them. And in the late game, if you're on a very low life, that means that like the engine that you're supposed to be using in this like late game situation to help you lock up the game and prevent you from being attacked, like if you're on a low life total, then it just doesn't work. So having that extra source of life gain is really key. And I think the deck could maybe fit in some extra life gain options. Like you could play 1 Crypt Incursion main deck, or if you think that's a little bit too weak in so many matchups, then you could play a card like Syphon Life or Unexpected Fangs maybe. Because yeah, the way this deck like uses its life total quite aggressively as a way to deal with the opponent's threats. So having a bit of extra life gain is quite strong. The other question about the mana base is whether Dimir Aqueduct is actually correct or not. In the version with 4 copies of Teachings and no creatures and all the even cards, justice and stuff, it made a lot more sense to play Aqueduct, because getting to that like 6 mana, 7 mana, 8 mana, 9 mana, 10 mana was really, really important for the deck. So you were happy to like take the awkwardness of playing the bounce land. I still think it's probably correct to keep playing it, because like as you see in like Boros Monarch, Boros Bully, all of these kind of like mid-range decks, even though they're not playing that kind of like super late game, they still get enough mileage out of the bounce land, even though their deck isn't really full of these like crazy expensive spells. So I think, yeah, the Aqueduct is probably totally fine. And this is, I think, it's like 24 lands. You still have fewer mana sources than the big Teachings version, because you don't have the pristine talismans. So I think it's probably fine, and I wouldn't expect that you like flood too much with like the Aqueduct ruins your sequencing. Yeah, so the fountain, the good thing about the fountain with the Aqueduct, of course, is that you gain 2 life every time you bounce it. Then for the sideboard I don't have a very good list. It'll just be like random cards that I have here. So Crypt Incursion I think is pretty solid. Probably want to play at least 1 copy of that in the 75. Hydroblast as well, just like a good card versus the red decks. More Exclude, I like to play more copies of that in the 75. Just so when you're playing against like a slower, grindy matchup, it's one of the best tools you have available. Then Dispel, just for those matchups where you expect them to have like Pyroblast, more counters, things like that. More removal options, so maybe Tragic Slip is not the right card as a sideboard slot, but maybe if something more like this is more suitable. If you expect to be playing against like Stormbound Geist and things like that, having an extra removal spell can be pretty nice, especially with the Exile clause. Annul, not too bad, versus Bond's Ornament. It's obviously a very popular card right now, all the Troll decks are playing it, and you're seeing it out of some more mid-range decks too now, like Jund and versions of Boros Monarch, things like that are playing Bond's Ornament, so Annul's pretty decent right now. Then more sweeper effects, so Cower and Fear is obviously outdated now, but if you want to play like Shrivel or Suffocating Fumes, solid card to play in your sideboard, I think. Then if you expect to play against a lot of like hard control mirrors, Stream of Thought is a good win condition. I think it's pretty solid, but I don't know if we're in the right meta for that kind of card at the moment. It's pretty narrow, so yeah. Oh yeah, and Chainer's Edict in the similar vein to Exclude, but better at fighting on the battlefield and gives you more answers to things like Blade Cover Scout or the heroic creatures. So yeah, that's the general idea behind it. I think the Foretell cards are really, really strong actually. People have been playing like the card draw spell, the Behold the Multiverse. People have been trying that like in familiars and quite liking it. Scry 2 Draw 2 is pretty strong effect. Pauper's never really had that kind of Glimmer of Genius effect before. Even just as like you must pay 4 mana and 1 shot for it. Now we have a version that lets you like split the cost over multiple turns. I think that's really effective, and I also think that Desert and Pauper in general is just like quite an underrated card. Furious decks always do really well in the tournaments, and it just gives you like such a nice way to answer their threats, both the Furies and the Ninjas, with like it's not counterable, it doesn't take a resource, etc., etc. It's just a very, very powerful answer. So yeah, that's my new brew for the week. Pauper Dimir Foretell Flash. This has been Life ITCG signing out.